Okay, great. There you go.
Got it. Gosh, this is wonderful. You're really good at this. Like Ian, I'm amazed. I couldn't do any of this at all.
Well, I like being a nerd. So, hello, Jenny. So,
Well, I like nerds. My son is a nerd as well. So, I do come from a line of nerd, but somehow it seems to have missed me out. My dad was a bit of a nerd.
there you go. I have a friend who once asked me very lovingly, David, has it ever occurred to you you might be somewhere on
The spectrum?
Right. And I said, good heavens, Brett, I'm a programmer,
Yeah. But the thing is, he said, my son has specific learning difficulties, right?
Yep.
He's very dyspraxic, which means he's very cack-handed, and he's dyslexic. He's incredibly conceptual. He'd have made a brilliant academic. I mean, he had ME when in his teens, and he couldn't have coped with the stress of, these constantly having to reapply for your job. But if I don't understand anything, I ask him, and he will explain it, and he explains it in terms that I can understand. But then Einstein was on the spectrum, wasn't he?
Absolutely.
Faraday was on the spectrum. DeLucci was on the spectrum.
Yeah.
We need people on the spectrum so that they don't charge on, and so I'm all for it.
So neurotypical probably means average and boring.
Well, it just means ploughing along in the same way, doesn't it? And with you think about climate change. I mean, I don't know if you've been listening to that program on Radio 4 in the morning at 9 o'clock, but on climate change. But they were talking about technology this morning, and they had one guy who was talking about shipping. And he said the problem with Bill Gates, and one of our SERA members absolutely loathes Bill Gates. She keeps sending things about what he's doing that's absolutely dreadful, like gene editing and all this sort of stuff. But it said he actually looks to how you can titivate the existing system. But what we need to do is to think about whether the system itself is right. Like, do we need to ship all this stuff all over the world?
Yeah.
Is that a good idea? Is it good for people? Is it, I mean, I'm a sociologist, right, in terms of degree. So that's the way I look at it. But, have we got all this right-wing stuff in America because they shipped all those skilled jobs over to Asia because it was cheaper? And now those people, of course, typically America, a bit like us in the Red Wall, didn't do anything about it. So they were just left get on with it. And so you either go left wing or you go right wing, don't you? But so I mean, I'm not against boring people who do it and come and empty my bins and keep things going and all the rest of it. I think it's great, but I think I've felt for ages, well, I mean, since Francis was born, really, and then looking back, thinking about my father, who I think was Asperger's, that you need evolution. Why have we got it? Like Michael, my husband, who used to make pots, he went on a pottery course, and she was on the spectrum. And at one point, she said, "Well, it's all very well when you lot were all sitting round, but somebody had to invent fire. We could keep warm."
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, right. Yeah. So anyway, you just carry on being on the spectrum. Well, I think it's great.
There's innovators down the ages, and anyway, so we've had an email exchange on account of being members of SERAs and some stuff that we've both written, and you suggested that we have a conversation, a fun conversation. I suggested that we record it. I'm sort of making this as an introduction. And you were saying in our email exchange that you'd actually got a copyright problem, but ignoring the problem, I'm interested, what book was it that you were writing that you've been publishing? So, what's your immediate current interest?
Well, right. Okay. Well, it's I first started to write this particular book in 2002, David.
Okay.
It was a long time ago. And it's set in Albion, and magic is very strong but tightly controlled. Albion is ruled by aristocrats, because this came about because Francis was studying the First World War. I mean, he's 39 now, so I'm going back. And we were talking about what would have happened if the First World War hadn't happened, you know, and all those aristocrats hadn't got wiped out. And so I thought that was quite interesting. And I put it together, and it's I like whodunits, murder mysteries. So it's about a female detective, and this guy's died basically. But they also, this is my personal wish list, they have smart houses, which if there's too much carbon dioxide, open all the windows, right? And also lock up when you go out, so you don't have to worry about leaving the keys in the front door, that sort of thing. And put the heating on. They also have things called Vobots, which clean the house. So they don't just do the floor. I mean, I've recently bought myself a robotic vacuum because I didn't get time to do all the cleaning. And that's lovely because then does the floors. These Vobots, they change beds, they clean bathrooms, and they've also, because I loathe cooking, have a thing called Mensters, and you can order up what food you want, and not only will it cook it for you, but when you want it, but also it will buy in all the ingredients which are delivered automatically. So you don't have to think about any of that. Excellent. And that very much is the wish list. So I've gone on, I've written 4 of them, and they're all scattered about on various memory sticks in various versions of Pages, because we've always run Apples. Yeah. And I put the first one on Amazon, God, it must be about 2016. And then I revised it according to what various people said about it. And then I took it off because I thought I'd put it on Apple Books because, you know, we run Pages much easier. What I didn't realize, because, and this is the interesting thing about concepts, is because I have a concept, if you publish something that's in hardback and right, you can read English and it's in English, you can read it whether it's secondhand, whatever. I assumed that Apple would have some means of making sure that books that you put on Apple Books can be read by everyone. But of course, that's not how it works. And of course, I didn't realize this, but I have sort of discovered, I think, because Michael, who's got no energy, does tend to look up these things for me, that I don't think I know you don't have to take them off Apple in order to put them on a different platform. And although Amazon didn't used to allow you to publish on a different platform, I think you can now if you accept a slightly lower amount of money for it. So those, and I've got another 3 books. I think I write them for distraction. Michael had to have chemo because he's got lymphoma, which is in remission at the moment. But you know, it was a sort of horrible time, and he ended up in hospital. And I think I write them to distract myself. Also, I enjoy the plotting of them. And of course, this particular series with Olivia Rowan, that I'm trying to put online at the moment, that's fascinating because, of course, magic and smart machines give you all sorts of possibilities for murdering people. But of course, it causes other problems. So the 5th book that I've got in my head involves burglaries. But how do you have burglaries in smart houses where, of course, all the windows are locked automatically and the house processor actually tells you who's been in your house and when the front door opened?
Yeah, everything's
so it's yeah. So and I tend to do that when I'm peeling vegetables and cooking because it's boring. Then I don't do it properly because I get sidetracked.
Wonderful. So we're talking sort of science, fantasy, fiction, kind of.
Yes, and this comes from Francis because Francis is this is my son. He's heavily, or our son, I should say, he's heavily into sci-fi. And when he had ME in his teens, which I think was caused by a bug, you know. He grew 7 inches, and because he had specific learning difficulties, we ended up educating him privately. And kids came from all over the world. So I think there was a nasty virus that came in, and it just overwhelmed him, his immune system. And so he would lie in bed with no energy, and I would spend as much time as I could reading to him. And of course, he liked sci-fi, so you know that's what I've read. But I'm not that interested in sci-fi. It's always murder mysteries that I like. You know, Anne Cleves and that sort of stuff.
Right. Great. Yes, I think, yeah, we've a lot to learn about how our bodies function in an age where immune systems are under constant attack from,
Mm.
from lots of new stuff. Very, very toxic environment we've created for ourselves.
Yes.
Anyway, so all of that is sort of clearing the air and setting the scene. But the topic today, well, you've got some questions about hydrogen, and I've been thinking about it for quite a bit, and and new stuff is happening all the time. So shall we sort of launch into your questions? And
Yeah, please do.
yeah, well, do you want to kick off, set the scene, and
Right.
ask a overarching question or something?
Okay, right. Well, the preamble, I think, is that we know that we need to do stuff about global warming and climate change now. We should have started it back in 1970s, 1980s, and we didn't. We just ignored it. And so now it's very imminent. And I am really worried about kids or youngsters who are in their 20s now, what
Yeah.
sort of, younger, perhaps up to 30s, perhaps even my son's age, if it's going the way it is. So the problem that we've got, or one of the many problems we've got, is how are we going to heat our homes? And I live in a new build, 6 years old, and because the government rescinded the Zero Carbon 216 Act, we have a gas boiler, unlike the terrace of houses, townhouses across the road that have air source heat pumps. We won't change our gas boiler. I mean, I don't think I would. I've got 2 sets of stairs, so I can't see me living in this house well, for that long. I mean, about 5 years, we'll probably have to move to somewhere we don't have so many stairs. But my son, who lives next door, he obviously will need to change his gas boiler. And I, until we talked, thought that probably, leaving aside the insulation, because I think the house is relatively well insulated, relatively well, it's certainly not passive, but relatively well insulated. How are we going to give people the heating that they need and do it in a way that everybody is covered, regardless of how much money they've got? Because, as I think you said in one of your emails, there's no way people have got £10,000 to put into changing their heating system. So it's going to have to be done, I think, on a district-wide basis. And I'm certainly, when the gas engineer came down and I was quizzing him, he was saying that the problem with hydrogen is it burns so hot that it might burn through your wall, which scared the life out of me. The problem, of course, with heat pumps is you need bigger radiators. So you've got problems. And then, of course, with gas, you've got methane, which, of course, is a nasty greenhouse gas, although it's short-lived. So, and then we've got the problem about, is it safe? So I thought, well, the current government aren't going to do anything because obviously they're neoliberal and you do it yourself or you stuff it. But if we were talking about hydrogen, the use of hydrogen to replace fossil fuels, what are the implications in terms of heating your house? And I suppose if we've got time, are there other uses for it? Like, as I think I mentioned in one of the emails, somebody suggested that the MOD are looking at it for powering their ships. Right, so it's how would we use hydrogen? And I think I dreamt up the idea that you were the expert that was, advising advising a Labour government, because just on that bit, not on insulation, because then I thought, well, we might actually get something that's perhaps more definitive, or at least that people believe. Because I think part of the problem at the moment is we don't know where we are with it. We should have settled all of this stuff much earlier, but we didn't. And therefore, even if you're trying to do the right thing or suggest the right thing, it's often very difficult to know what the right thing is, or the thing that would work. I don't know if that makes any sense.
That's fair enough. It does make sense. And if we zero in on heating, there's a danger that somebody sort of looking at the answers is going to say, yeah, but you're forgetting this. And what about transport and rail and modal shifts and all these things? And I'm thinking of my earlier experience in technology. I was a computer programmer, and I jumped on a plane once and went to America for 10 years at the end of the 70s. And I was there throughout the 80s. And before I left for America, everything was very fragmented in the field of microcomputers. You had ZX80s and this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And it was all, these are never going to mean anything to anybody. 10 years later, when I came back from America, the IBM PC existed already, Microsoft Office existed already, and I got a Macintosh, right? And I came back with a Macintosh. So 10 years later, a lot of the chaotic thinking had resolved. And where we are with energy and global warming at the moment is right in the mess where we're trying to figure stuff out, acknowledging that we've made a huge mistake. And I would say, yes, we should have been doing stuff in the 70s. As soon as the Limits to Growth report came out for the Club of Rome, we should have known that there were troubles up ahead. And it was predicting all sorts of really terrible things, which are our everyday reality now. And if we'd done something, there was a famous, well, not to the rest of the world, but the world's best electrochemist in the 70s was a man called John O'Mara Bockris. And in round about 1976, I think, can't remember the precise date, he wrote a textbook, a book called Energy, the Solar Hydrogen Alternative. Right? That was a textbook. And it included everything you're going to do with energy. And the basic thesis of the book was that and of course, hydrogen, you can't mine hydrogen from the ground. There are sources of hydrogen, but hydrogen is not an energy source so much as a storage medium. Of course, it's used in stars for fusion energy, but we use it for chemical energy, and it's the first chemical element that's made. It's the most plentiful element in the universe. Bockris, as a chemist, was saying, it's a fantastic storage medium and transmission medium. And he was sort of saying, I believe that we are going to have plentiful renewable energy. And he said, if you like, you can say it's going to come from nuclear. If you like, you can say it's going to come from solar, but doesn't matter. Whichever of those it comes from, we're going to have peaks and troughs and the need to move energy around and to do things with that energy. And my answer is hydrogen, I mean. And he writes this wonderful textbook, which I have 2 or 3 copies of. It's no longer in print, but I sort of buy them on Amazon when I do a search and find, there's a copy going for 20 quid or something like that. And so the bottom line of where we're going to be 10 years from now is, I sort of look back 10 years ago, Bristol started its moves to become European Green Capital. And it formed a Green Capital Momentum Group. And the first thing we were thinking about was, basically, we're not doing renewable energy fast enough. What if we were to run out of oil before we've got enough renewable energy? And that was only 10 years ago. And so Bristol commissioned a peak oil report to figure that out. And the peak oil report dealt with renewable energy, climate change, soil depletion, and all these things. It was a great report. But just a few years after that, 2011, the first feed-in tariffs came out, and communities and everybody started experimenting with solar energy as well as wind energy. Communities started to get some experience and to build up. And we've reached the point where more than half our electricity, not electricity is only a third of our energy, but more than half our electricity is supplied by renewables now. And for the first time in 10 years, we're actually a net exporter of electricity. You know, how do you do that? You know, do you put it in batteries and shovel it abroad? No, there are interconnects between us and Europe, us and Ireland. And whether it comes to us or goes to them is based on who's offering the best price. And we sold something like 1.9 terawatt hours of electricity to Europe for about 3.6 billion pounds.
Crikey.
Which is about 1.6 pence a unit. And when you're looking at, but I pay 16 pence, or rather I did, and now I'm paying 32 pence. So,
yeah, exactly.
So we've reached the point with our mostly wind energy where we've got an excess of electricity on some days, and we either have to sort of, you know, throw it away because we haven't got anywhere to store it, or sell it for the best price we can get, which is just pennies. So as soon as it's just pennies, you could be using your surplus wind energy to make very cheap hydrogen.
Right.
Right? And
yeah.
that's the starting point. The starting point isn't, should we be using hydrogen to heat our homes? Because somebody's going to say, well, you know, there's bad hydrogen and good hydrogen, and it's very expensive, right? So that's not going to work, is it? Which is why the current debate is around air source heat pumps for everyone and district heating networks for the centres of cities. And as soon as Bristol said, we want to be carbon neutral by 2030, which was only 3-4 years ago, we started to think about these things. And a year or so later, people started coming around saying, well, we're starting to think about it all. And the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get rid of the gas grid, because the gas grid's got methane in it and you can't burn methane anymore. So we're going to have to shut down the gas grid. And there's me sitting with my copies of John O'Mara Bockris saying, you know, the answer is hydrogen. So I said, what about hydrogen? And they said, no, hydrogen's a unicorn. You know, it's not going to be working properly in 10 years. We can't rely on that. We've got to think of things that we can do now. So we started being told that we were going to go down this road of air source heat pumps and shut down the gas grid. Right? That's the way things went. And I'm sitting around as a kind of, in my technical view, there are things happening that are going to, things are going to be very different in 10 years' time than they are now. But the seeds of what they're going to be like are already here. Just like the, you know, the Sinclair ZX80 couldn't do very much. But if you project forward a few doublings in power and halvings of price, then you start to think of something like more like a mainframe computer in a box. And you can't see that far forward, but we should be thinking that way. And one way to think about how we get our new energy economy is to imagine we're already there. That in 10 years' time, we've solved the problem. What's the answer going to look like? Well, the answer is going to look like energy, unless we carry on voting in these kleptocratic governments, we're going to end up with energy that is much cheaper than it is now, and it will be plentiful, not scarce, and it will be clean. And in some ways, you can look on. I mean, the war in Ukraine is awful, but the war in Ukraine is actually an energy war. And it's there because Ukraine's got the biggest potential wind resource in Europe, just because it's a big country and it's fairly flat, right? And it's got gas fields. And Russia is looking at it and saying that I sell gas to Europe, right? So I want Ukraine. And more than half of Russia's income is from selling non-renewables. It's from selling fossil energy. So the fossil energy companies are basically fighting a war for their own existence. And there's no reason why they shouldn't be overtaken by renewable energy. And the first clear clarion we heard of that in the Labour Party was at the recent Labour Party conference, when Ed Miliband got up and said, we're gonna be carbon neutral by 2030, and we're going to do it by renewable energy. We're going to double onshore wind, we're going to triple solar, and we're going to quadruple solar wind energy in the North Sea. Well, hang on. We're already at the point where we've got so much wind energy in the North Sea that we can't use the electricity, that we have to start exporting it. What if you quadruple it? The problem becomes far, far worse. And here's how bad it gets. In the early days of the Energiewende, the energy revolution in Germany, following Mrs. Merkel saying, we're going to stop nuclear, they got lots of solar in the south, lots of wind in the north. They had big cables going north-south and south-north to carry Bavarian solar energy to the north and northern wind energy to the south. But there were days when they couldn't use all the electricity. And in the main spot central markets, the price of energy went negative. Right? So what do you do when the price of energy is negative? Well, there were entrepreneurs who were getting buildings and basically filling them with kettles and boiling water with energy that they were paid to use, right? Because the price was negative. Now, that's completely insane. You don't want to be, you don't want to set up to, I'm going to use this electricity wastefully when the price is negative. So I'm going to store it and I'm going to use it when I can get a better price. If it's dirt cheap when the wind's blowing really strong, and we'll have 4 times as much if we quadruple wind energy in the North Sea. Why would you do that when you can't use that much energy? And the answer is because the overall generation in the North Sea will come close to matching the country's total energy need. Just it's at the wrong time and in the wrong place. But as soon as you put hydrolysis units, possibly even in the towers of wind turbines in the sea, and you start shipping that as gas to the coast, do we know how to do that? Excuse me, North Sea gas here, Governor. You know, we absolutely know how to ship gas from the North Sea to the mainland. And we also know how to, we know the opposite of taking it out of underground stores, because we were taking methane out of underground stores. So if you've got a surplus of hydrogen, you can store it underground, under the North Sea, and you can ship it to mainland as and when you need it as hydrogen. At that point, you've got a choice. Am I going to use that hydrogen industrially? Am I going to put it in gas turbines and make electricity, which is how we're making electricity at the moment? Or am I going to put it in the gas grid? Right. So that's the big picture. That's the sort of technical picture. But the question is, if I was the advisor to an energy minister, the guy I'm talking to is probably started yawning quite some time ago, and he's gonna be saying, yeah, but how am I going to explain this to ordinary people and sell it to them? Right. And step one, there's a second step which is quite important, which I will get to. Step one is you say, well, guess what? you're not going to have to make much in the way of changes. And you said, we changed our gas supply around once when we shifted from town gas to North Sea gas. And all that involved was somebody coming round and changing the burners, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that wasn't a big deal. We already know that that's possible, that you can, in fact, town gas, this gas that we used to use was a nasty mixture of flammable gas. First of all, it was half carbon monoxide, which is
Right.
highly poisonous, which is how people used to, commit suicide by sticking their head in a gas oven. And it was half hydrogen. So people are saying, oh, you can't ship hydrogen around, it's too porous, it leaks in the pipes. We used to do it all the time, right? So the response to that is, give me a break. And there's another important thing to say about gas in pipes. It's fire, and I heard this at a conference, and it really woke me up. It was a techie, and he was saying it's 7 times as easy to transmit energy as gas than as electricity. And it's 7 times as easy to transmit energy as electricity than gas, than heat in pipes, than as heat. So moving energy around as heat is 7 times less efficient than moving it around as electricity, which is 7 times less efficient than moving it around as gas. And that's important. If you're saying we're going to have to shift to doing our winter heating by electricity, our electricity network is already at capacity.
Yeah.
Right? And we consume far more energy in the winter, but it just, travels through the pipes, no problem at all. It's the capacity is already there in the gas grid. And it's much higher rate of energy use. So you would have to, if it was not for heat pumps, which have a coefficient of power, you would have to, if you were using radiant heat, we would have to more than double, possibly quadruple or whatever, the capacity of our electricity network to drag that heat around. Radiant heat is very expensive. I'm tempted to add a bit here, unless you use the right form of radiant heat, which is called low frequency infrared heating. You don't have hot bars, you have panels on walls that give out low frequency infrared. It doesn't heat the room up, it just heats up your skin.
Oh, like a heat lamp.
Yeah, very, so the first thing I would say as an energy person coming in, I would do what Ed Miliband has said. I would say we're going to generate all the energy we need renewably. And I would start a program of R&D and tests and community visioning to look at what are the best solutions. I would ask communities to come up with their own vision for their own energy. You find communities with really savvy people in them who will rush out and buy copies of, What Do We Do Now? Chris Goodall's book. What we need to do now, Chris Goodall's book, right? And start thinking, Chris says we should be doing this, we should be doing that. And we would quickly start to move towards the kind of consensus where we understand what our future energy system, at least in its first version, is going to look like. But
and that, of course, would, sorry, interrupting, but that would fit in with Labour's vision today, which was about taking back control, but doing it locally.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And one view of that, this comes from the European Federation of Energy Co-ops, which has got a really strange acronym that doesn't immediately come to mind. I might flash it up on the screen. It's funny because the general manager is a guy called Bert van Tinsjant. So I can remember the complex name. Anyway, ResCo-op, the European Federation of Energy Co-ops. They started to talk about how you do renewable energy in a very interesting way. And they said, imagine that you're a Greek island right? You can see all your energy coming in on boats that come to the island. Your energy comes in, all your energy comes in as liquid fuel, right? Diesel and petrol. And you run generators to make your electricity, and you drive your cars around the island. And guess what? They've figured out that if you invest about 4 times your annual energy bill in local renewable energy, meaning wind energy and storage, by the time you've done that, you have become energy independent, and you don't need to bring fuel in on a ship. You think, well, hang on, if I'm energy independent after spending, well, if I carried on spending, so that's 4 times my annual energy bill was the capital cost of putting up the wind turbines and stuff, right? Well, if I just charge everybody half what they've been paying for energy, I'll have paid that 4 times much off in 8 or 10 years. So, or after 4 years, I could pay it off at the current rate I'm buying energy, and after 4 years, I'll have energy for free. So, okay, they're paying a little bit over the odds for their electricity because you're generating all your energy with petrol, and it's cheaper. Electricity from gas is cheaper. But you can start to think that way. You can think of a city or a city in its bioregion as an energy island, right? So this is what we started to do in SERA a couple of years ago. We started asking energy questions and then thinking, could Bristol be an energy island if we weren't getting our energy from the mainstream? And the council commissioned a report and discovered in the report, it said Bristol uses, I think, £860 million worth of energy a year. And that £860 million, of course, think about it, most of that goes straight outside Bristol, right? To a multinational, and it never comes back, right? So we're making money in Bristol and then running around saying, hello, Shell, excuse me, Shell, excuse me, Centrica, excuse me, whoever, we've got 860 million quid for you this year. Will you give us energy, right? So the question is, how much energy do we use? How much would it cost to generate that much renewable energy? How much would it cost to store it? And how quickly could you pay it off? And these numbers are not to be taken to be taken with a fair-sized pinch of salt, even if it raises your cholesterol level. But roughly £1 billion worth of solar and £1 billion worth of wind would generate all the energy that the city needs. That's including transport.
Right.
But you'd need to spend a couple of billion more, maybe 3, maybe 4, 5, 6, maybe as much as 10 billion. But I think definitely not as high as that, more like 4, 5, 6, 7 billion to create the energy economy that we want. And I'm excluding the cost of electric cars because people buy cars all the time. That's an ongoing consumer item. But if you said, well, it's going to cost 6 or 7 billion, then that 800 million will pay that off in 10 years. But the cost of energy infrastructure is usually paid off over 20 or 30 years. So you can again say, well, let's enjoy energy at a third off our current prices or half of our current prices, and then gradually taper it off lower and lower until and then so that's what the picture is going to look like by 2030. Either we'll have done it by ourselves or we'll have done it nationally. And I was thinking, well, could we raise 5 billion in Bristol? Well, it turns out that the community is already building a wind turbine, and which is £5.5 million item, and there's another £1.5 million in the pot for replicating that 10 more times across the south, and another group has got 2.6 billion for community climate action plans. So, you know, you could start to think about doing a microgrid in each constituency as an example of what would work. And you could do that over the next couple of years. And then somewhere between this future when we've already solved it and these experiments that we do over the next couple of years, you gradually ramp up. And then when I heard Ed Miliband at the Labour conference saying we're going to quadruple offshore wind, I thought, well, then we don't actually have to generate all that wind in Bristol. Probably don't have to find the money for it. So we're not going to have to find 5 billion and so on. So I got one more big piece of the jigsaw that I want to throw in, but let's take a checkpoint here. Is this sort of making sense as an approach? Do you think?
Yes, it is. I think, yes, no, it's very much making sense. And well, coming at it, as I come at it from being, you know, the sociological point of view, because I mean, you know, I started graduating in 71, but it obviously influences my thinking still. I mean, I think any technology that doesn't involve disrupting what you've got already, which is what you seem to be saying over hydrogen.
Yeah.
We can stick it down the pipes and you could do like we did from town gas to natural gas.
Yep.
We could do it that way. Seems to me that a much better way of looking at it, because you don't actually have to convince people, you just say, this is going to be done. The other thing I think is, and this again is probably the way I was taught sociology and the way I was taught economics, I actually believe that the state can and should find the money to look after its people.
Right.
So I mean, I'm all for it being done locally, because obviously Bristol, what, you've got 5 million, Plymouth's got 256,000 people, I think. Exeter 125,000. But you know, if you talk to obviously Ian and some of the other people, they live right out in the sticks. They live in small towns. Budley Salterton, I used to live in Exmouth, 36,000. Budley Salterton 5,000, I think, of that. So you do need that local input, because one size won't fit all. You've got to think how it actually works or will work for that particular community. But I don't think, personally, I don't think that communities should have to raise the money. And I can see why you did it in Bristol, and I think it's great. But that means that you're excluding those who haven't got the money or are in private renting or all the rest of it. And, you know, I mean, my view of economics, which was actually sort of to an extent vindicated this morning, I was taught Keynesian economics, no, not this Randian economics about neoliberalism, which I think is a load of old rubbish, quite honestly. And also this idea of the private sector, we were taught, and I think it's true, that the state has to undertake more risky ventures because the private sector is interested in profit and or needs profit. I mean, it's not think about how they are at the moment. They only care about bloody profit. But, you know, they're not going to take the risk unless they've got the profit, which was why, of course, we had so much problem with Eurostar, and probably why we don't have high-speed railways through the country now, which, of course, is a lot cheaper and better than flying. You know, and I know, because I've got friends down there, that about 3 or 4 years ago, it was cheaper to fly from Newquay to Edinburgh than it was to take the train, and easier. And I thought, well, how can this be? You know, it's just, how have we allowed it to get to this point? So leaving aside the financial side of it, it all makes a lot of sense, because obviously if you're looking at it from the political point of view, you really got to not disrupt people's lives any more than they are at the moment. But I also think it would be easy to sell it because, you know, I mean, I learned that we got a lot of our electricity from France and it was nuclear. And of course, because some of their plants are out at the moment for maintenance or whatever, that we're not getting the electricity that we need. But if, as you say, we could get to a point where energy is so much cheaper, I mean, gosh, that would open so many possibilities, wouldn't it?
There you go.
Which is exciting.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking of two different things here. It's very, one is the finance side, the capital side. And it's sort of like ordinary people shouldn't have to pay. So you think, well, if corporations put the money in, they're gonna take all the profit.
Yeah.
And ordinary people haven't got the money, and so you get in this little loop. So there's something worth mentioning here. One is that cooperatives can raise money just as easily as corporations, right? So community cooperatives and cooperatives of communities can raise money. And there's an example in Bristol about 6 years ago. A group of guys sat down and said, we want to encourage more innovation in the community. Let's raise a little fund to invest in the community. Bristol and Bath Regional Capital is what it became. And as I heard it, I can't be sure I'm telling the story properly, but these 6 guys each put in 25,000. And they said, we're going to need somebody to chair this and somebody to run it. And they found good people. And the guy who was chairman was saying, you know, I'm not sure how are you going to feel if I lose your money and if I take risks, right? Have I got to do this safe? No, we want to encourage investment in the community. He said, well, what if I lose money? And they said, it's only 25 grand each, you know, don't worry about it. And he thought, well, if that's the way they feel about it, I'm going to go ahead and do things. And I went to an evening meeting where they were celebrating the fact that they had done projects in, you know, every neighborhood across Bristol. And they had got to the point where they were doing affordable housing because they thought that was very important. And they were just about to launch their next fund, and they were looking at raising 150 million. Right? That's after 6 years. They've sort of grown to the point where, you know, they've got people who understand investment, and so on. And they had a guest speaker who was a lady from the Impact Investment, 3I, Impact Investment Institute, or Institute of Impact Investment, which is about investing in communities to create an impact in communities. It's not about investing to not get a return anymore. It's that you're going to get a return and it's going to be long term and it's going to be reasonable, but we want to create an impact in our communities as well. And she was saying that the amount of locally domiciled capital in the UK, basically meaning pension fund money that's based in the UK, was something like 2.6 trillion pounds. Well, whatever math you do, that's more than we need to completely decarbonize the whole country. So we have got enough money in our pension funds. So it isn't that you go to somebody and you say, we need you to contribute to creating our renewable energy. You go to people and say, you already did.
Yeah.
But your money has been put by your pension fund in BlackRock and Vanguard, and what it's being used for is fossil fuels and deforestation. So what we need to do is get our pitchforks out, go over to our friendly local neighborhood pension fund and say, you should be investing locally. And they say, fine, but first you're going to have to show me that investments can work well locally. And you say, well, funny you should say that.
Yeah.
Look at the example of Bristol City Leap, where the council said, we're not getting the money from government, it isn't going to happen. Can we get the money from private sources, and can we put it to use intelligently? And they put out this prospectus, City Leap prospectus, and said, here's a bunch of projects that we think could be financed with other people's money and give a reasonable return. And we are willing to go in partnership with partners who are willing to work with us. And they went through this official, OJU European procurement process, which I'm not particularly happy about, and people don't particularly love, because that's what got us expensive hospitals and schools under, through private finance initiatives. But what Bristol has just done recently is sign a contract with an American energy service company and the Swedish National Energy Company for a district heating network. And the reason they're able to do that is because Vattenfall have already done district heating networks in Berlin and Amsterdam and other cities. They've shown that you can reduce the cost of energy for people while giving a reasonable return to investors, i.e. themselves. And they're offering to do the same in Bristol. So it's a relatively low risk deal. So they're coming up with 400 million. And the mayor is saying, gosh, I've been able to get money through private sources to tackle climate change. And Bristol's actually, Greater Bristol is about a million people, not 5 million. Bristol is a member of the Core Cities Group, which is something like the 11 biggest cities in the UK. You can look it up. And they got together with a energy expert group, which I think was the Connected Cities Catapult, and said, can we identify a bunch of projects that we want to raise money for? And this was in the last year or so, basically following the experience of COP25 and COP26, when governments weren't saying anything and obviously weren't going to be investing in climate change in the time frame we wanted. 2050, yes, but 2030, how are we going to do that? We're going to have to do it ourselves. And the Connected Cities Catapult decided that it was going to source, they produced a report with their first whip round, and it looked like they could find 500 billion pounds worth of projects, $500 billion. And they decided to look for 206. And the last time I looked at their website, they're now looking for 330 billion, which is at least enough to get us halfway to carbon neutral across the country, to get us. And that's within 1 year of starting this thing up, right? And what they should be doing is investing in R&D and so on, and in communities to figure out what, to refine on their first guess. So you got first guess, it's going to cost this much. Let's start to look at how we raise that. Look, the pension funds have got enough. Let's make sure that cities are investable vehicles for pension funds. Let's start to turn the pension funds' ears and eyes away from BlackRock and Vanguard and towards impact investing in a city, where you will get a return on your capital. But guess what? You will be investing in energy that creates clean air, so less people dying. You'll be investing in jobs created in your city for the pensioners, for your children. And you'll be investing in cheaper energy for everybody, which is going to oil the local economy. As the cost of energy comes down more and more, people will find it's easier and easier to do stuff. You don't have to be on a treadmill earning the money for your energy bill. And we should be doing the same thing for housing, which, as I said, BBRC has already started into. So I got one more lump to drop into the picture, but does that make sense in terms of raising cash?
Yes, it does. I think what's interesting, and this comes into what you said about housing, I think capitalism has actually changed in the sense that large corporations, I don't know whether they did or not, actually. Perhaps we just didn't know. But I know now that large corporations don't give a toss about either their consumers or their workers. Workers, I mean, it's very Marxist, really, are seen as a cost, not as a benefit. And so I suppose this is partly from living in the new build where I live here, because I know that the volume house builder that built it did everything on the basis of cost. They subcontracted everything.
Yep.
And it was all on the basis of cost. So all the snagging was actually picked up by the subcontractors, and they didn't really care. You know, I mean, it's all hot air, because a bit like rail, a bit like Royal Mail, and the rail people at the moment, the ratio between what you get as a CEO and the senior management get and what you pay your workers has grown exponentially. I mean, I can remember, and I expect you can, when the boss of British Gas, I can't remember what it was now, but I forget what he got, and it was only it wasn't the sort of enormous ratio that you've got today, but there was a terrible hoo-ha about how much he was actually earning. And I can also remember, because I sort of vaguely knew her through a friend of a friend, some dreadful woman from the Institute of Directors actually saying that companies bear no allegiance to anyone apart from their shareholders. And of course, you could argue that it's not even their shareholders that are important, it's the incomes of the people who run it that are important. And I think people have got fed up with that. And I think what that has done with this whole thing about BP only putting a fraction of its money into renewables, and mostly it's still going on fossil fuels, and you know, they care about what's happening in Africa and that sort of stuff, is that people no longer have any faith in corporations. And so what you're talking about, investment, is very interesting because it gives you a different view of how you get that investment.
Yeah.
You know, and so from the government point of view, how would you actually ensure that that investment is facilitated? You know, the good investment in terms of green investment is facilitated. And what also do you do in, say, red wall places where, let's face it, you know, since mines or shipbuilding or whatever is shut, they've just been left to get on with themselves. And so they want coal mines, or at least they say they do. Whether they actually really do or not, it's another matter.
Well, what they do want is the renewable economy, because that's going to create loads and loads of...
Exactly. And actually that makes a lot. I can see now, because, you know, I mean, I'm not particularly left-wing, but I'm probably slightly more left-wing than Labour appears to be at the moment. But I can see why they're pushing this fact that we need, obviously we do need to insulate houses, and it will create a lot of high-skilled jobs, because that actually presses a lot of buttons.
Right. So there's a whole other topic. I think, you know, we if this is going to become a sort of some bullet points and questions and answers and a video, then there's another one that we should do on the topic of housing. But very simply, about a third of the cost of your house is the cost of building it, or less. And a third of it is what the landowner gets, and a third of it is what the developer gets. And if you go to councils and say, let us have plots of lands on the edge of small towns, these are called urban exception sites, and what we're going to build is completely affordable housing on it. We don't want to pay £1 million an acre like Barrett would. We just want to, well, rent it off the farmer for more than he'd get for farmland in perpetuity or whatever. We'll create rental housing, and you could immediately start creating rental housing in the region of you know, £100 a week or £50 a week. We get back to housing that wasn't, I'm going to have to get on the treadmill and tread really hard just to be able to afford my house. I mean, you know, people are talking about 6 or 7 or 10 times their, you know, 70, 80% of their income just going in housing. When I graduated, I didn't earn a huge salary, but a couple of years after I graduated, I was able to buy a house, and for just a third of my monthly income. So we need.
My parents said to me, because I wasn't working, you know, Michael was working, but I wasn't working. I'd only just graduated. Do you want a wedding? You know, because you had to get married, obviously, in those days. Or do you want the money? And I said, no, we'll have a deposit for a house. And we had a 500 quid deposit they gave us.
Right.
We were both earning by that time, and we bought our first property.
Well, so, and the point is that's possible. And let's do a different, I think this can become a chat with bullet points and then events. Themed events for SERA, so that we well before the next election, we've looked at housing, we've looked at transport, we've looked at energy, we've looked at finance and so on, and we can see a connected set of solutions. But yeah, housing could become as affordable as energy, and it wouldn't be going back to the old days. We would be ending up with, you know, super insulated modular homes, and in mini communities with co-housing features, not, you know, barrack estates. Anyway, last piece of the energy equation, and it's the answer lies in the soil, as they used to say. This is an idea that comes from Dale Vince and Ecotricity, but which I've had some contact with in the past, because I got very interested in anaerobic digestion as a way of creating less wasteful farming systems that created their own fertilizers and so on. I've got a video on YouTube called Sustainability on the Pig Farm, which has got quite a lot of views, and it's about a farm with an integrated waste management system. So what Dale Vince is saying at Ecotricity is that he has discovered a vast natural gas field, and that is on our farmlands. And so it really is a field. And his idea is that you take farmland, and as we shift to eating maybe less and less meat, rather than farm incomes dropping and dropping, you ask farmers to grow wonderful biodiverse grasses on the farm, right? And you mow that grass, you cut it, and you collect it as silage. And you feed that silage into anaerobic digesters. Now, anaerobic digesters are quite interesting, because the digestive tract, what a digestive tract of a ruminant is designed to do is to extract energy efficiently from the food that they eat, right? So what animals poo out of their back end, apart from methane gas, what they poo hasn't got a lot of energy in it. But if you do collect the slurries from animals and put them in anaerobic digesters, it's not exposed to the air, they decompose with the activity of anaerobic bacteria, and they make methane, or a mixture of methane and other gases, which is called biogas, but that can be very easily turned into pure methane. And you get energy out. But like I just said, the cattle have already extracted a lot of energy from the grass. So if you put fresh grass in a biodigester, it's actually incredibly rich food for the biodigester. It can give a biodigester indigestion.
Oh, wonderful.
But you just tune it differently. And what happens is you get a load of energy out of this. And there's a precedent for this, which is worth mentioning. And it's when Germany reunified, The government had to think, what are we going to do with our farmers? They haven't got a chance against our West German farmers. Our West German farmers know the way to the market and everything. These guys have just done what the state told them to do. We've got to find them something useful to do that will give them incomes. And they got them growing crops for energy with anaerobic digesters. They got them growing maize. So there's a precedent for farms being able to make a good income making energy out of growing crops. There is a problem. You don't want to grow so much crop for energy that the price of foods go up. No. So this has to be really carefully considered, but I think this goes into the mix. And Ecotricity and Dale Vince have done a load of arithmetic on this, and they're saying we can make a lot of methane this way, and that methane could go in the gas grid directly, right? So once again, you're looking at 22 million homes connected to the gas grid, who we're telling you're going to have to cut yourself off from the gas grid and convert yourself to air source heat pumps. Yeah. We'll give you a £5,000 grant, which will only cover half the cost, and then you probably need to insulate your home better as well. So it's £10,000 and the rest. £10,000, and 90% of the homes connected to the gas grid use gas for heating. So you've got 20 million homes times at least £10,000. That's £200 billion to be invested just in switching our heating from gas to electricity. Whereas instead you could go to people and say, guess what? Don't do anything. Yeah. Just carry on using your boiler. We might be around to change. And so we've got two possible routes to explore: one methane, one hydrogen. And it turns out that you can blend 20% hydrogen into methane in gas, and it works just as well in the gas grid. So there's a hybrid solution available. So heating our homes, yes, of course, we can reduce the amount, somebody, but we've got to stop using energy. Well, energy is going to become cheaper, and it's not such a problem that a house is badly insulated, but we want people to be warm. We want our homes to be efficient. Let's do all that as well, but let's do it not on the back of the government saying, oh my God, we're going to have to spend £10,000 on every house, plus we've got to insulate every house. It isn't as if the government has got a magic money tree, because every time you print money, like on that scale, on the quarteng scale, as we could call it, where 60 billion is the amount that you can lose in a day just by publishing a bad budget. But if you've got to find 200 billion and you just print money for it, you destroy your economy, you deflate your economy. But if you said, oh, all we've got to do is build 400 or 500 biodigesters, put them around the country near farms, let farms sell silage at a profit, helping create sustainable rural incomes to these biodigesters. You could have the biodigesters be owned by the farmers. You could help set up co-ops. And 500 biodigesters, even if they cost 10 million a piece, it's only 5 billion, not 200. So
what I find fascinating about what you're saying, David, is you're very much also aligning it to the financial side of it. I was never that good at maths, and I'm really bothered about that, apart from thinking about the problems that people have doing it. But I think it seems to me it's integral to what you're saying, that you're actually looking at the cost of it and how you make that cost as efficient as possible. In other words, how do you make the money work for you as well as it actually can?
Yeah. There was a time when bringing in computers and the internet cost people extra money. The most expensive laptop I ever bought was £3,500. It's really, it's an Apple 3400 or something, but it cost as many pounds as the number, the model number. but it was their first color laptop, and it had 2 gigabytes of disk storage. It was wonderful. So there was a time when these things cost more, and when getting the internet was in addition to your phone bill.
Yes.
Then it became that the internet was included in your phone bill. And now my phone bill and my internet bill used to be up in the region of 30, 40, 50 pounds a month. And mobiles used to cost that. And in the last months, I renegotiated my internet and my mobile phone, and both of them are now less than 20 pounds a month.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Plus, I'm paying another £20 a month for my phone. Right?
Yeah.
Brilliant. And so we've gone through a transition from an old communication era to the point where, and we can have a phone call in video, and you could be in Australia, and this phone call will be costing us nothing.
No.
And when the internet just started, I was looking at it, and I heard from this professor in Africa, and he was saying it used to cost him a month's salary to fax a paper to a colleague in the United States, right? And then he said how much it cost him. Now all he had to do is make a local call and upload it, and the internet to it. And he gave the numbers, and I had to keep working it out, because it looked as though it was 1,000 times cheaper on the internet. And, it wasn't twice half the price. It was really, shifting the decimal point. And it was over 1,000 times cheaper to do things the new way. And so this is what we've done with our communication. And it's what we're doing, maybe not to the same extent, but we should get to the point where we have bountiful, cheap energy within 10 years, and we should quickly be being able to map out a route to it. And like I said, in this last year, at the beginning of this last year, there were 2 questions. Could communities make wind work, and could they make solar work without subsidies? By about April, there were a series of events held that were about breakthroughs in wind and solar. And it turned out that you could put solar on the roof of a factory and the community could afford to invest in putting solar on the roof of a factory or community centre, and they could sell the electricity at half price and still get a return on investment. And that's only going to get better. So by the end of the year, I'm at this event where the council are saying, yeah, well, we brought in some money to tackle climate change in the centre of the city and give people cheaper energy. And now we got together with our chums, and we're looking for 330 billion to do the rest of the job. And it's like, wow, we are thinking at the scale that we need to tackle these problems. The next step will be creating the economy that delivers these solutions. And that's going to create loads of work, and I think, and hope, thriving local economies, on the back of which people living, you were saying we've got to do something equitable for rural communities and towns. Well, part of it's going to be, well, the starting point is don't have to do anything, because we can deliver you gas at the same price it used to be, not at the price it's doubled to heat your home. But we'll be doing it out of local community-owned energy enterprises, which will have, let's not call it profits anymore, that we're being ripped off by multinationals. And remember, the price that we're paying for energy at the moment is based on high profits being extracted by multinationals, right?
Exactly.
We can bring the price down and still have surpluses. And then in a community where you are hands-on, you can say, whose house is in worse shape and needs fixing up next? And, you sort of send the boys round, you send the community round, and you fix up somebody's heating or insulation.
You see, it's I mean, again, it's such I think it shows that what that program was talking about this morning is right, that you've got to actually not look at it as a sort of add-on or amendment to what we've got at the moment. You've got to actually look at it totally differently, because I mean, it's a great idea that you use the surplus to make people better off.
Yeah.
Isn't it? In not better off. Well, yes, they will be better off financially, but better off in that their life is better. I mean, I was thinking, you see, our townhouse faces south. We have tiny gardens. And in that heat wave in the summer, it was absolutely appalling. I mean, we couldn't sit in the gardens. It's so hot. And so I was also thinking that if we're going to get these heat waves, then you could also think about how you could use air conditioning to cool people down, because it's the other side of it. And I know, because I've got aunts who live in Australia, I mean, they're dead now, but I know they were saying that they use air conditioning all the time in the summer because they live near Sydney. And I was thinking to myself, even then, gosh, you know, that's a lot of electricity that you're using. But it's, you know, I mean, global warming, we've got to stop it. We've got to stop it, obviously, for youngsters and not make it any worse. But we've also got to adapt. I mean, it's like with flooding and drought, isn't it? And having more reservoirs and clean water and all this sort of stuff. So that's the other side of it, I think. And also, of course, that would appeal to the oldies who can't go with their heat anyway.
Yeah,
well, you know, we've got a north-facing sitting room, and we were spending the whole time in the sitting room. My son, who's a bit overweight, he actually bought himself a small unit that threw out moisture as well, because he just couldn't cope with how hot it was.
We are going to have to do this, and of course, if you do have a proportion of us putting in air source heat pumps because that makes sense as part of the mix, fine. I don't think we should you know, make it a forced approach. And if it was something that everybody should take up, then we've got to make sure that everybody understands that it's what we, the community, think is the best solution, that it's going to create the best benefits in the community, that it's not creating rip-off profits to go to corporations, that it's not being done by politicians who are working on pension funds and mostly funded in their job by, you know, vested interests and lobby groups. The more we shift at the same time, in other words, to heating our homes and powering our homes with renewables, we should be shifting to doing it within our communities and making our communities more resilient and more vibrant and more thriving.
Yeah, which of course then broadens it out into the democracy, because I mean, one of the wonderful things about living in Plymouth is the first time in my life we actually have a Labour MP. I have a Labour MP, and also most of the time, not at the moment, we have a Labour Unitary Council, who, you know, I know from living in Exmouth, Salisbury, Wiltshire, have a totally different attitude towards the collectivity of people than most of our current Tories do. I mean, the UKIP ones in particular, perhaps not the One Nation ones, because they used to have a sort of paternalistic view, but I mean, they've all gone. We've got rid of all of them.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course, so it broadens into that, because Plymouth and Exeter are fine. But, you know, and I listened to Ian and some of the other people who live out in the sticks. I mean, their MPs are horrendous. They're absolutely completely awful, and they don't care.
One of the opportunities here, I mean, we've already got, we have a number of successful neighbourhoods who have developed projects on their own or with some grant support, but sometimes with lottery money. The Lawrence Western wind turbine grows out of grants that came from a lottery fund called Big Local. I think, something like that. And they help use that to strengthen their community to the point where they're saying, looking over towards the Severn and saying, see those wind turbines over there, why can't we have one? And now they're building it. And there are a number of neighborhoods who've been really good at self-organizing and others who aren't. But that's being the ones who are starting to be successful at figuring out projects to tackle climate change are looking at helping others. And one thought is that you get all the neighborhoods within a parliamentary constituency together, and you go and approach your MP and you say, do you know what? It's going to cost $500 billion to get the country to carbon neutral. Most of that could and should be invested locally. So guess what? That's £1 billion, £500 million or £1 billion in your constituency. In your constituency. And guess what? There are regulatory barriers, and there's work that needs to be done to bring people together. So we want you to bring all the neighborhoods in your constituency together. Come and sort of act like our local prime minister. And then when you go up to Westminster, it won't be to, try and fight or try and impose legislation that is destroying our rights, taking away rights from unions, privatizing the NHS and so on. You'll be focused on what is the legislation that we need to create sustainable communities with renewable economies. And you can be helping get rid of the blockages, which are many.
Yeah.
So that, to me, that's something to throw into the debate about what Gordon Brown has been proposing for, localization in some form, I think.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's very good, because I think one of the things that has struck me, and it's just a pragmatic response really, is it's very different depending where you live. I mean, I've lived in Croydon, I've lived South Norwood, I've lived in Kingston, I've lived in Maidenhead, I lived in a village in the north of Wiltshire, I lived in a village just in the south of Wiltshire on the Hampshire border. I've lived in Saltash, I've lived in Exmouth, and we now live here. And they're all different. And when I talk to friends who still live in the village in the north of Wiltshire, which is a great village, I mean, it was a great village to live in, although I think some of it has changed now because, of course, women all work. And before, it was women who did all the voluntary stuff because they were bored by being at home. But, women didn't work. And so they did a lot of stuff. And now, of course, women work, which I'm all for. I'm not against it. But, they're out at work all day. So there aren't the people about to do the voluntary work that there used to be somehow. And I mean, a lot of our oldies like us, I mean, maybe they're not in Bristol, but, it feels to me that perhaps it's because we feel guilty about the way it is. I don't know. Or maybe because we're baby boomers and we expect, we knew that life got better. I mean, certainly I think when I was in my 40s, life was a lot better than it is now for people. And I don't want to leave that legacy. So, I mean, the thing is, what's interesting about it is it all ties in together, David, doesn't it? So you're right, what you need is a very different way of looking at it, which takes in what you've said about what's the easiest way of bringing this change about, what's the cheapest or most cost-efficient way of bringing this about, how do you make sure that it fits the locality, which is probably very different, I don't know, than here, than it would be, say, in the New Forest, something like that, or Southampton. And also, how do you mobilize people? I mean, and that may be how you pick up youngsters. I mean, it's interesting that in this reuse shop, which is struggling, I went up there yesterday. The lady who used to be the shop assistant there, who was lovely, she's left. And so the owner has managed to recruit a young woman. I mean, God, she was young enough to be my granddaughter, basically. And she's obviously very much into green things because, you know, she said they don't buy new clothes, they shop secondhand and all this sort of stuff. But you've got all that energy, and somehow I think we need to mobilize it in a way that will work, because, you know, Extinction Rebellion is saying now that they're going to change their tactics. Just Oil, obviously, I mean, I'm all for that, like I'm all for these strikes at the moment, but, you know, it's not, how do you actually get it so that people feel that they can participate? And certainly around here, I know from my neighbours that they work so hard that even if they're interested, they wouldn't have the time to get involved.
You have to give people a sense of a shared vision. We're not getting that from our present government. People felt it a little bit from Jeremy Corbyn and his Green New Deal, and I think it's being reintroduced on the sly by Starmer, who's saying, I'm going to create a very conservative-looking electable Labour Party. But he's got Ed Miliband there, who's quite radical and who understands energy, set up DEC and so on. And you're going to be able to go to people, and it's just like John Kennedy saying, we're going to go to the moon in this generation.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're not going to do it because it's easy. We're going to do it because it's hard.
Yeah.
And the hard job in our generation is going to be remediating climate change. We have no reason to believe that anything we could do will stop the Greenland ice cap from melting, right? When the Greenland ice cap melts, that's 16 feet of sea level rise.
Yeah, exactly.
So we can be talking. I immediately think, oh, great. You know, we can be moving uphill a little bit. We could be creating wonderful little communities on farms that are growing their own food, right? We could put community supported agriculture and rewilding in our farmlands, and we could, you know, dismantle our tired old cities and live in a much. We don't need as much space anymore. I mean, in my generation, since I came back from America, I have lost the need for all the gadgets. You know, I haven't got Wi-Fi's and I haven't got hi-fis. I haven't got oodles of cameras, stacks of photo books and everything. Because I'm a nerd, I've got the desktop computer that I'm using. I've got my phone. I've got my laptop computer, and everything I need is on those three machines.
Well, I mean, I noticed this with my son, because I mean he's chained his computer. I mean because I think he got ME just when the internet was really getting going. He stopped being able to sleep at night, so he ended up with loads of friends, internet friends all over the world, all on different timescales, and partly I think that's why he hasn't gone back to a normal sleeping pattern. You know, I mean, he's on hackers time, wakes up at lunchtime, because he's still in touch with all these people, and he's been on holiday with them until COVID struck. But you know, as you say, you don't need the hi-fi that we've got sitting in our living room with all those records. He doesn't even, I mean, he has got a television, which was my dad's, not a smart television, and he doesn't watch it. You know, I mean, he plays games on it occasionally, but I don't think he even does that now. He plays them on his computer. And so with the phone and the computer, and I've got all these photographs of my parents and various grandparents. I think, what the hell am I going to do with them? What's he going to do with them? So I think you're right. But I think also what I've feel living in a new build because the rooms are incredibly small. Hence the fact that I'm going to have to go for cordless vacuums before I get to the age where I'll trip over the thing and break my ankle or something. But you also need more outside green space.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we talk about housing, I mean, what's interesting is the volume builder here, because I mean, it was dockyard land, right? So it was the Urban Regeneration Agency that, and they struck this deal with Red Roads, the builder, in 2006, and then they built it in phases. Well, the early phases have got lots of trees, street trees. Down here, we were on the penultimate phase, I suppose, and they put the trees badly planted in a foot into our garden, and they've all died because the land underneath is toxic, ex-dockyard land, bomb flat in the Plymouth Blitz. And of course, the council will not enforce the planning constraint on Red Row, even assuming they take any notice, because it's actually on private land, so they won't enforce it for us. We didn't ask to have that tree a foot in, they just planted it, and then it died. And yet, well, I was just going to say, with COVID, having more green space, because, you know, I look out my window, there's a tower block out there, which we didn't notice when we put the property off plan. There's houses opposite. Well, how long is our garden? Probably about 16 foot, and theirs is 10 foot. So there. And so being stuck in with COVID, because my husband is very vulnerable, I just look out on bricks. And I've realized how much I miss birds for a start, because the fences are high and we've got too many cats, so we haven't got birds. And also I miss the green trees. I just miss, you know, being able to walk about on all of those sorts of things. So, you know, again, I think it's about how you conceive it. And as you said, you don't want a Barratt estate. I mean, when I lived near Romsey, when we lived in the south of Wiltshire, they built all these dreadful estates around Romsey, and literally, if you went in there, you could get lost, because all that, they're all detached houses, but it looks as if some giant had plonked them down. And the only way they were different was that the colour of their garages was different. And that was the only way that sometimes you could find yourself around it. And I know, because one of France's school friends lived there. We used to go and visit. I had terrible troubles finding them, because every house looked the same. They had slightly bigger gardens, but whether or not, how people were when, you know, when COVID came and kept us all in, I don't know. No, so there's all of those sorts of issues as well, I think. But it's what you were saying from a sociology point of view is that we need to look at things very differently. You can't just look at it as it is and say, okay, yeah, we'll do this now. It's a bit like public transport and cars. You know, is it really feasible that we can replace all our cars with electric cars? Or would we not be better to think more about public transport again and making that convenient, and also making sure that if you live out in the sticks, you don't have to drive a car necessarily, or you're not considered a second-class citizen, because our wonderful Tory council at the moment has just removed a load of what do they call them? Bus shelters. I've just taken them away. And of course, Plymouth has horizontal rain. I mean, I've never known so much rain. I mean, not just now, but generally. So of course, all these old people, youngsters, disabled people who wait for buses, I mean, tough, you know, if they get wet and sick, well, you know, that's up to them, isn't it?
So,
sorry, that's veering off.
No, the thing is that if you, I know when we first started talking about putting some solar on people's roofs in a community, we would regularly have whole evenings full of pent-up pain and frustration of the results of 20, 30, 40 years of neglect of communities, and in fact direct assault on communities through globalism and capitalism.
Yeah.
And you were talking about corporations being run on profit.
Yeah.
A chief executive of a company can be taken to court and forced out of their position if he doesn't focus entirely on making profit. And that is the number one driver of our economy, and it's not fit for purpose in an age where what we've done is we've created an economic engine that's been incredibly efficient. One advantage that the Chinese have over us, they now have, well, they now have state capitalism, but they use the profits of that. First of all, they don't go out and out for maximum price on everything they sell, and they use the profits to create infrastructure in the country. What we've done is we've used our profits to create billionaires and oligarchs, and that creates corrupt regimes, which we very nearly got with Trump and Boris, which are just feeding wealth to the oligarchs, and then that corruption weakens the entire regime until you discover that Putin can't actually fight a war. And what we need to do is rebuild our communities on, renewable and sustainable principles. Today, I got in my mail a lovely letter from a community group who are talking about the council's plans for new development on a large area of floodplain around Temple Meads. It's one of the biggest areas in Europe, and they're saying, we tried to create a community vision for this area that would have included a football stadium and what do they call it? A concert hall. And we're going to have another go. And the point is, we should be having community-led planning, and then you wouldn't get the kind of housing that you just find so painful because it's grotty developer-led stuff.
And also, I think people wouldn't feel so helpless.
No,
because I mean, I'm a doer, and I often feel totally helpless because I think, well, I mean, an example that one of the blocks of flats that was first built, but was now 16 years old on this development, has that shape of roof. Now, why they put that shape of roof in Plymouth, with the amount of rain we get, I cannot imagine, but they did. And it's leaked since day one. So that means that it's not, it hasn't transferred the responsibility of whatever this homes lot is, you get after 2 years, they deal with it, assuming you meet their points value. It stayed as Red Rose responsibility, and it's 15 years later and they still haven't fixed it. And they've had to move people out of their flats because the water was actually running down like a cascade on the inside of their walls. And they tried to offload it onto the freeholder, but of course they flogged the freehold off to an investment vehicle, so that doesn't really exist. And now they want the management company, because of course we have management companies as well, but the flats have a separate one. They've told them to fix it, and the management company has done nothing. Right. And of course, all this rain we've had, the flats, I mean, they've got kids in as well, some of them, they haven't sorted it out. And there doesn't seem to be, anyway, a bit like cladding for ordinary people on ordinary salaries, some of whom were on right to buy, to actually do anything that actually gets action. And the local MP's been involved, they've all put pressure on, and yet it still hasn't happened. And I know, because of the other management company we've got for the freeholders, that they swapped from the Hazelvine, which were the management company for both of us, when we got directors, because Hazelvine were absolutely useless, but they're still there for the flats. And of course, they're totally useless and they're not doing anything. What do? You complain to the housing ombudsman. Well, he didn't do anything for the freehold lot. Or you complain to their trade association. And all this time it rains and the water comes in. And I think that is also another reason why you need these community-led ideas. And it's also how you involve the entire community. Because I know, as I say, Devonport, you know, there are middle-class bits. What's this estate? I would think this estate is probably mostly a few Bs on the Registrar General's whatnot, if it's still available. But they're mostly C1s, C2s, basically. So skilled manual or skilled non-manual, or, you know, officey type people. And they've all got families. And so they haven't got a lot of time. You know, they're too busy actually just existing. You've also got a lot of, you've got some people who live in social housing, because Plymouth transferred all its council housing to various housing associations ages ago, some of which are okay, some of which are bloody awful. And then you've got a very middle class bit by the cricket pitch, where I think the flats, I think they were talking about 600,000-700,000, which of course is big for Plymouth, you know, because it's quite a low price area. And yet they can't get any sense out of their developer either. But at least, but they are the sort of people that will get involved and won't have it, you know, they will push. But I get the feeling that, I mean, we've got, I think there's 40% social, 40% private renting in Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport. And you get the feeling that some people just accept what they're given. And it's, I mean, one of the,
what are they to do? Most people, most individuals have not got the skills, the competence, the time, or the bandwidth to take on the system.
Exactly.
And even when you club together, you will find that you take on the system and you lose. So at some point you have to, it's like the people in Ukraine are no longer worried about the walls on their, you know, the leaky roofs and things like that. They're fighting for survival. If we have for 40 years been at the wrong end of a war against ordinary people by the elite. Exactly. But it's not even, it's not a war of evil people against us. It's a war of a machine that we created called capitalism, right? Yeah. And the engine has got more and more efficient. So to the point, suppose you went round to everybody and said, look, if you, from tomorrow, you're going to get twice as much money as you used to have. Is your life going to be a bit easier? And they say, well, God, bloody hell, yes, of course it is. And you say, but we're going to cut your energy bill in half as well. And we're going to sort out housing that costs half as much. All of that is completely possible at the moment. The elites have got more than half the world's money supply by extracting profit from everything that we do, right? If you, you're not going to redistribute that. But at the very least, you stop doing it. You stop giving them money. You stop letting them extort from our communities. And then you start to introduce fair planning. And so we have to find a way of suspending people's need. I mean, it's like when you go into hospital, you've got trauma. Basically, you've got to stop the bleeding. We'll tackle your, you know, other underlying problem another time. Yeah. So if we do need to give people the space to talk about what's wrong with their lives, their difficulties, their trauma. We need to tackle collective trauma. We need to tackle intergenerational trauma and all these things. But we need to establish a new economy in which people have the space to deal with, you know, the survival issues. You know, first of all, we want to get you off your rubber dinghy where you're drowning in the channel. We want to get dry land with a cup of tea, We need to find you somewhere you can live. We need to get you food. We need to get you the support that you need. And we need to be doing that within our communities. And the reason that I chose energy 10 years ago was because you might sort out somebody's housing, but you won't sort out everybody's housing. But you can sort out energy for everybody. You can create a new energy economy in which energy is abundant, clean, cheap, and you have tackled global warming. You haven't done the what are we going to do if the sea does level does rise 16 feet? The answer is no. It's not a question of whether it's going to or not. It's a question of when it's going to. And we will have to tackle that, and that will require our resources. But first, let's get ourselves to the point where we've got an economy where energy and a load of other things are abundant, clean, and affordable.
And of course, if you did that, you would give people agency because they would have hope.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have the situation that we have now where delivery people come round at 7 o'clock at night because they have to deliver their parcels, and if they've got 50 to go, that's tough.
Well, they're on a treadmill too. It's not that it's that they're being run by their logistics companies on
exactly.
the minimum wage.
Yeah, exactly. And yes, it's all fascinating. I mean, the other interesting thing I was thinking when you were saying that, David, was I must find a way when I've managed to write up all these notes and make some sense out of them, and you've agreed them that I've got them right, of passing that information to Plymouth Labour, because you can tell, as I said before, that Labour people in Plymouth care. And of course it has had a Labour local authority more than it's had a Tory local authority. I mean, I think in 2019 it was Brexit, and the whole, I mean, 70% of people voted leave. And I think, just because we have elections, I don't know whether you do, but we have elections every year, and then the fourth year is fallow. But I think they're hoping to get back this year because the Tories have all been fighting amongst each other, because a lot of them were UKIPers, of course, and so there's no overall control at the moment. But it's not, Labour hasn't got a majority, but Labour has done quite a lot as far as it's been able to with the funding it has for the community. So I know, for example, that we've got a lot of old buildings, right, in the centre that were old cinemas or that sort of thing. And this group took one over, and the council did actually provide some money to try and allow it to generate income. And then a local Rio, which is a not-for-profit, which runs our market hall, which has if you think virtual reality without needing headsets, 360-degree virtual reality. Apparently it's the biggest one in Europe, apparently. Anyhow, and they actually provide grants and things to help local groups actually look after these buildings and make income from them so that they can maintain them and that sort of stuff. So there is a lot that I think the council tries to do, and if it can recapture Plymouth, which I think it will in May, unless the work falls in, that they will do that. And I know that one of our local ward councillors is chief of shadow environment, but we've also got someone now, and I don't know whether he's a councillor or not actually, who is looking at what's going to go into the May manifesto, Labour manifesto, on climate change. And I'm just thinking that a lot of this would be useful for him. So I think when we've agreed it, I will pass that information to him as well. I mean, the problem is, because I'm virtually under house arrest at the moment because, my caring for my husband, and also because of his vulnerability to COVID. We don't go to meetings anymore because, you know, so if it's not on Zoom, I can't do it. But I'm sure that they would be interested in looking at this. I know that there's a difference between Plymouth is much poorer than Exeter, because, you know, I used to live near Exmouth. So, but the other interesting thing that I was just thinking about was Exmouth is on the Ex, of course, on the estuary. And someone I know who had lived there for 15 years said they'd actually noticed that the height of the Ex was going up. I mean, obviously it was tidal, but they'd noticed that, you know, its average height was much higher than it had been when they'd moved in 15 years ago. So obviously, you know, sea levels are already increasing. I mean, God knows what London's going to do, but and I look down. I mean, we live relatively near the dockyard, and I'm thinking, I live up a slight hill, so hopefully by the time all that water gets up here, you know, I'll be dead and gone, and so will Francis, so I won't have to worry about him.
So my idea is that we take all these topics, you know, one is planning, which is what you've been talking about. The Labour Party and the Labour government had wonderful ideas for reorganising local planning in the Egan Review of Skills in 2004, I think. So the Review of Skills for Sustainable Communities. So there's all sorts of templates available for how we shift from our current non-functional local democratic systems, from robber capitalism, from energy companies that are ripping us off, from water utilities that are poisoning our seas. All of that can be, you know, it just requires some grown-ups in the room who aren't looking to stuff their pockets with cash or being paid to deliberately upset things so that companies can carry on therefore business as usual. And the energy system is just one route into this. But you know, if we can come up with a vision for our communities that includes energy as a topic, that includes how we plan together as a topic, that's working on transport, that's working on housing, that's working on the economy, so that you've got a simple document somewhere that you can point people at. I did this when the Egan Review of Skills for Sustainable Communities came out. I fell in love with it because Sir John Egan was asked by John Prescott to figure out how to create sustainable communities. What skills would we need? And John Prescott basically said, you can't get, Sir John Egan said, you can't get there from here. You can't get there from here because our planning system is broken, or rather, our planning system is designed to not deliver what people want. It's designed to deliver profits. And what you need to do is shift to a planning system where you bring together councils, both their elected officers, their elected members and their officers, and you bring together the people who deliver the services, and you bring together the communities, and you bring together the developers, and you say, what do we want? And you build a shared vision of what you want. You're no longer saying, we've got these planning rules, developers, you can submit things, we'll try and knock them into, we'll try and force you to deliver some. You decide what you actually want as a vision, and when you've agreed it, you do it. And if you haven't agreed it, you wait until somebody comes up with a better idea that you can all agree. You don't fight and say, oh, well, you know, there's got to be compromise and people have got to miss out. You say, let's get our creativity and our intelligence working at maximum level. Let's bring in people who know how to bring groups to high levels of resourcefulness so that they create good visions that can be agreed on. Let's go and look at best practice around the world.
Oh, how wonderful.
All of these things until you say, good Lord, we've at least got a good vision for maybe just a part of our town. Well, let's do that and see what it looks like and use that as an example. And as a developer, we wanted to introduce the Egan review stuff, and we did it in 2 stages. First of all, we tried to build a sustainable community in the countryside to rescue an agricultural college, and we got it down to the point where we'd got a book, which was a vision that had been created by us working with the community. Everybody wanted it, but then the 2008 finance crash hit and we didn't get to do it. So we took a building that we'd got in town, just like what you're describing, and we turned it into a community hub.
Yeah.
And loads of community enterprise grew out of that. And this current initiative is a part of that. The idea that you work towards so I'm thinking we take this conversation, and that is the start of an energy thread. This isn't the answer. It's just one part of a collection of ideas that becomes maybe a couple of pages in a shared vision of community energy for each neighborhood. Some have already got them. You do the same for housing, transport, education, health.
Yes, you see, because you've got to change the parameter, haven't you? I mean, I consider myself relatively well informed, and probably as Secretary of SERA, Devon and Somerset, I try to, as far as I'm able, to keep up to date with it. But you know from our emails that it's actually a very confusing picture, and it's very easy to only think about it in the way that you always think about it. You know, and the baddies are the baddies, and oh, well, we can't do anything about corporations. Whereas, of course, you're right. You could do something about it. I mean, you could change the situation where CEOs have to make the maximum profit, or they can be sacked. You know, you could change that around so that what they were required to do was to make sure that they run the business in a way that it works for their consumers.
Well, you won't get that overnight, and so that causes a problem. Oh, we're going to have to wait until we've got a new kind of government, and then we're going to have to decide on this. But what you can do is you can say, no, we'll just build local cooperatives to create our own energy locally, and stuff the corporations.
Yes, I can see that, David. I suppose, yeah, I can see that. I suppose I come back to this idea that it's going to happen in places where you've got people like you, but it's not going to work in certain other places, which is probably why I come back then to the role of the state. But yeah, I mean, I can see that one can't actually wait. So what are we going to do about all this then, David?
Okay, well, so just on that point, it isn't that people get left behind. It's that innovators start stuff up, and you might have a local energy group. You might have Bristol decides to put up a few wind turbines and then decides to do something a bit more. It's doing okay. So the rest of the core cities say, why don't you take the lead on energy? And Marvin comes along and says, well, why don't we raise 300 billion so we got enough money for everybody? At which point you don't have to worry about people being left behind, because you've got to the point where you're planning renewable energy for the whole country. But it isn't that everybody needs to do what the best neighborhood with the best microgrid does. It's that the people who built that microgrid have contributed to a city figuring out an energy solution, and then that's spilled over into a country filling out its energy solution. And I think we're going to see things happening faster and faster. Like at the beginning of this year, I said communities didn't even know if they were going to be able to do wind and solar. At the end of the year, we've got one community putting up its wind farm with $1.5 million in its bank account to help it help 10 other communities. And you've had Bristol working for 6 years on City Leap, raising 400 million and saying, now let's raise 330 billion. At that point, you're definitely shifting gear. The other thing that we haven't mentioned at all is artificial intelligence. Our computers our computer systems are going to go through another level of evolution. And instead of social media being used to create division, we're going to have artificial intelligence, which will shift from being used by corporations to rip us off, to being used by individuals to accelerate a shift to better quality of life.
I think, yeah, I would like, that would be another lovely conversation about how we did that.
Well, like I was saying, you know, there's a conversation to be had about transport. There's one about all of these things. And at some point, you know, if we at SERA work on themes this year, and you take a theme and you lay down a marker, like we might be doing with energy, maybe there's another conversation, maybe there's a question and answer, maybe there's a little mini conference. And then we start to do that across all the other areas, to the point where by the end of the year, when you've got an election in sight, we've got an integrated picture of what we can be doing.
I think it probably needs to be broadened out wider than SERA, because we had an email discussion in SERA, Devon and Somerset about SERA nationally, and somebody who, I'm not a member of them, although usually I'm on their mailing list, because obviously I'm the secretary, and we ended up finding out that, or somebody found out that they could only find 3 SERA groups. Yours was one. There's one in East London and there's one in Sussex, because when one of our members did a load of work on how sewage companies were chucking, you know, the water companies were chucking sewage in, and the number of incidents was going up and up, we tried very hard to publicize it, and we didn't really get much help from SERA nationally, because I think really they're operating a bit like a branch. Yes. And I hope that they would actually have people in the north of the country, SERA groups, because I mean, I've signed petitions about, you know, dirty water coming in into the lakes and that sort of stuff. So I know that there's people up there doing it. But it also strikes me that from one of our SERA members, I get a lot of stuff on Cornwall climate change, and I haven't really sorted out who they are. And the trouble is, I don't get time, you know, sort of days go. But maybe the other thing that we need to be thinking about is how we broaden that knowledge to other like-minded groups beyond SERA. And there's this new group, isn't there? I don't know whether you get Labour list, but there's some new group or other which has been set up to look at climate change. I can't think what it's called now. I'll try and remember to send you the link to them.
Yeah, so we've still got Labour for Green New Deal. We've also got, you know, there's the Radical Alliance people. We've got as many Green councillors in Bristol as we have Labour, and we need to be involving everybody in every constituency eventually. And like I said, if you take the point that we are going to be spending $500 million to $1 billion in each constituency to tackle climate change, then you can imagine, oh, well, there should be a functioning community hub in every constituency. There should be a team of people working on climate change who are paid to do it. So you work towards that, and you work towards it by saying, you know, what will it be like when we have got to carbon neutral? Well, energy will be half price. We will be making all that energy locally. There will be X amount of money spent on installation and maintenance. This employs a lot of people, some of whom will be in admin and planning. That's people like us.
Yeah. Yes. So really, part of it is also coming out with a short narrative about which actually says what you just said. You know, that it's in the future, this is what life will be like, and it will be a message of hope. And as you say, you then work backwards about how you actually bring that about.
Right. It's like, how long do you want to stay stuck in the mud?
Yeah,
And how soon would you like to be out on dry land, washed clean and eating decent food?
in an hour.
Yeah. And that's the point. Once you have a clear vision, it's really easy to get there. So you understand how much energy is being put into making sure that we don't see the future clearly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that we feel victimized, we're fighting each other, we're scrabbling for existence, we're wondering whether I need to go to the food bank, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That has to stop, and it has to stop quickly. And we should start getting ourselves organized and into our better future, in my view.
So so all of this is happening in SERA Bristol, is it,
Well,
Dave?
SERA Bristol. So I'm, for lack of, I got dragged in by Andy Burkitt, a buddy of mine, a few years ago, and then kind of hijacked into being chairman for a year, which I've been. And what I've been focused on is a vision of what we can do for energy as a pattern for lifting SERA out of being, a few people who meet, many of whom have got quite specialized interests, towards thinking about creating a working resource towards. I think you're right. It shouldn't just be SERA. Extinction Rebellion have a vision of working with groups of groups, and we should be going along saying we've got a little bit of political influence. We can help get a clear vision into our people who are, we can connect the clear vision that's emerging nationally of taking a country to carbon neutral by 2030, and include that in the, turning our cities and our towns into more and more self-sufficient energy islands. But it isn't that they're going to have to generate all their energy, because if we've got, there was another piece we haven't talked about is ITM Power, who are this electrolysis company based in Sheffield. They have a very clear vision of how you can generate all the energy we need in the North Sea and ship it around the country as hydrogen. So once you've got that in place, communities aren't suddenly, oh, we've got to shift from oil to, oh my God, how are we going to make all the energy we need in our city? No, the grid will be full of hydrogen and locally generated electricity, which is, North Sea electricity coming into the country as hydrogen and then being turned into electricity where we need it through, mini turbines and things like that. And we'll figure that we just need to start thinking this through quickly, not interminably, but quickly. You can't say Putin's arriving with a bunch of tanks.
No.
Within a couple of months, we've got to figure out what we're going to do. You've got to start doing stuff right away. And you've got to be having the conversations about rearming and getting the weapons we need here. Same true for energy, same true for housing, same true for food, same true for welfare, and so on. So we need...
sorry.
Yeah, we need to shift from being groups that are funded working on the volunteer energy of a few people who've got a bit of spare time, to groups that are starting to come together in a professional way, engaging with our communities and figuring out what our communities want, figuring out what's possible, and then starting to make sure it's delivered by a mixture of corporations, but working for us, not working for their own, more in Norway, the state owns all the energy sources, but the corporations that are working on energy using state franchises are paying high rates of tax. Government says, you know, you're going to pay 85% tax on your oil
got a
franchise.
sovereign wealth fund from all their North Sea oil, haven't they?
Yeah. So we need to just start talking intelligently and about how we shift from rip-off capitalism as practiced by introduced, practiced, and mastered by Margaret Thatcher and her cohort to a new form of participative, community-led sustainability.
Yeah. Yeah. You see, it's interesting because I was thinking that the SERA members, I mean, not a lot of them don't manage to make meetings. And in fact, one of the ladies who lives in Plymouth, who in fact has started a book, an environmental book lending library in the community, the climate change hub down in what was the old Waterstones building. She said, look, I'm going to apologize because I like being part of it, but I'm never going to get to your meetings because I'm so busy,
Yep.
with other things. So I think part of what I see my role is to share as much useful information as possible. So that feeds into their, it's like, I mean, one of the members is part of the CLP in Exeter, and she's also part of XR. But I don't think she gets to meetings, but I often get stuff from them saying, thank you for sending this out, or thank you for this. So it's how you share that information, which then, gets into other groups. So I think I've better actually go in a minute, hadn't I? Because I am costing you on a fortune on Zoom, but also I want to get tea. I think what I should do, David, is I'll write up what I've got. It's going to take me a few days to do it, and it might take me into next week because we've got a SERA meeting on Monday, which means I'll have minutes. And then, have you heard of this 3F group meeting on Tuesday? No. It's an open meeting, and they've got Jim McMahon speaking.
Okay. Send me a link.
I'll send you. I mean, it's Joe Joseph. He was a ex-MOD environment officer, and now he's a sheep farmer, and he's their convener. But it's an open meeting, so I'll send you the details of it because obviously everybody's welcome to it. And it's 7 o'clock. I think it's 7 o'clock on Tuesday evening. So that, it's going to be a busy week. But if I write it up, and then I'll obviously share it with Ian and Irena, our vice chair, and we can then think about what, if anything, we can do with it. Because I know Ian, and obviously he was part of SERA Bristol, but it does strike me that we need closer ties because you're coming out with all this information. We've obviously got other information that comes in, and it all helps to inform what we're trying to do, doesn't it?
Well, you did a great event on water, and we should do one on sea level rise at some time and all the rest of it. We should be, to me, we should be assembling little jewels about the different topics so that we can, it's not a matter of we meet once a month and we have an agenda and there's minutes and nothing happens, we're starting to assemble a resource based on themed events and building a shared vision of what life will be like under a more caring government. And we just work towards that. We again, even with the SERA meetings, may not be very big at the moment, but in 10 years' time, there will be large local groups. There will be, so here's, suppose we spent 4 billion in Bristol. This is closing shot, last shot. Suppose we spent 4 billion in Bristol on tackling climate change. Half of that will be on stuff. Half of it will be on labour.
Yeah.
Half of the labour will be on people who know how to do this stuff, professionals. The other half will be young people coming in under, let's have it be apprenticeship schemes that
Yeah.
lead to accredited university level
Yeah.
degrees. And so you take, I don't know how much, what's living wage. Suppose you put those young people on 15 grand a year. Not you're going to have to do a degree and you're going to end up with, I was talking to somebody who was, admittedly, she was studying to be a vet. She was going to be over £100,000 in debt by the end of her.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Yeah, it's
So,
disgusting.
but let's say, now by the end of your degree, you will have earned 45 grand on living wage. You will have subsisted. You certainly won't be on a grant. You may not be on a grant, but you won't be in debt.
No.
And you will have been with a cohort who has learned all about creating sustainable communities. You will have done some solar installation. You will have helped retrofit a house. You will have a good idea how to put together a team that could build zero carbon new build housing, right? So 15 grand divided into, 100 million per constituency, that's 1,000 young people per constituency.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or 1,000 young people years or something. So you will have a generation of new leaders. It won't be a bunch of old farts turning up for a SERA meeting. It will be a vibrant, large, funded group of young people who have become environmental leaders in their.
And I think that would help a lot, because if I think about this young woman in the reuse shop, she's obviously doing her bit, but she must feel that there is more that she could do if only she knew how.
Well, what if we were going to be spending throughout the country at least 330 billion on regenerating our economies and getting to renewables? It creates loads of jobs, it creates loads of housing, it gets people out of houses, homelessness and all the rest of it. And we just need to spend some time clarifying this vision, discussing it more amongst ourselves, involving others, involving ourselves with others, taking our, making our vision clearer, which you'll be doing by writing it up and I'll be doing by editing this video, and at least making it available to some people, perhaps, we'll see, and so on.
I think you should, David. I mean, the problem that I have with videos is, I suppose, because I, have an academic background. I mean, I started life in personal and then ended up teaching management before we ran our own business. But I don't have the time to watch videos and webinars. I've been trying to watch one of the Exeter University's Global Institute webinars on land ownership, and I've been trying to get round to watching it for 2 months. I didn't even watch it over Christmas because somehow the day goes, whereas I suppose I find it quite easy to take in written information because I can scan it down, and I don't always pick it up. I'm not saying that I'm wonderful at it, but if you've got a load of bullet points, it's quicker. So that's probably why I go for that. But I think you're right, because you need a number of different vehicles that will appeal to different people as well.
And if the vision is you're going to go to this meeting, or you're going to watch this video, or you're going to read these points, and you're going to have enduring misery, that's one thing. If the vision is, I would like you to come to a meeting and we're going to put solar panels on your house for free, we're going to make your house better, we're going to cut your energy costs. Are you prepared to come along to that? And the answer is, we got people in a deprived estate to come along to all of our meetings. They wouldn't come to one meeting of 3. They came to all 3, and they were angry at most of those meetings, and we let them vent, but they ended up with solar panels on their roofs, or some of them.
Exactly.
And once you start to deliver on your promise and commitments, then you bring people with you, and it all snowballs.
And I think what really comes out of it for me, and I mean I know this anyway because of how I used to teach management, but you've reinforced it, is what you need is the vision. this is where we would be, and therefore we then work back to how you get it. Because once you've got an agreed vision,
Yep.
then you will take people with you.
Yep.
Because once you say, oh, you're going to have solar panels on your roofs, all of your roofs, or you're going to, you know, we're going to change your heating system, it's going to be hydrogen, but you don't have to do anything. And if you haven't got central heating, I mean, you know, we've got to leave, obviously, the people that aren't on gas, but, you know, leave that aside for a bit. Then, of course, we all know where we're going, and it's just how do you get there?
And we're going
Whereas
to do
at the moment, we're all faffing about because we don't, you know, well, at least I'm faffing about, you're not obviously faffing about, because I don't quite know. I know where I want us to get to, which is militating against climate change so that, you know, future generations have a, you know, have a reasonable life, and not only here, but in the rest of the world as well. But it's how do you get there that is the problem. But as you say, it doesn't matter. At one level, it doesn't matter if it's totally right, as long as the vision looks good and you can work back from that. Because if you then get technological changes, you can incorporate them in. It's like Francis said to me, now I can't remember which sci-fi writer it was, somebody famous, and he was writing in the 70s. He wrote very good futuristic sci-fi, but he didn't think about mobile phones. He had no idea of them. And so that, of course, even though he was very futuristic, he was stuck in this idea that you have devices on tables. You don't carry it around in your pocket. So I think there's all of those sorts of things.
well.
What
That might have been good enough for science fiction future, and not getting all the technology right may be just fine for getting us started.
exactly, because then if you find a different route to it, it doesn't matter as long as you know where you're going.
Well, look, let's just end on that upbeat point and just draw a line under this. Write this up, get it posted, share it if as and when appropriate. But just use this to say we've got started on a process, or we're extending somebody else's process. Whatever. We're taking these ideas, and it's great. Thank you, very much for coming at me with some questions about hydrogen. Let's turn it into, we're working towards a sort of a picture in our communities of what we're going to do. Other people are working on this, of course, and have done loads. But if we can all engage with our communities to a certain extent, great.
Yeah. I will write it up. Probably, I don't know how long it will take me, but I will write it up, and I'll also have a chat with Ian about it, about how we can. Because I mean, we were thinking about doing a.
Well, we should do an energy meeting like we've done for water, and present the basic ideas, allow for some discussion. Again, once you've got these things thrown up on as a video, people can give feedback in the comments as well. It becomes a living record. And this is something that you keep revisiting. Every year you go right through the whole thing, so that your vision improves and expands every year.
But I also think I don't know, and this may be just me, but I think it helps because it sets a path. I mean, as I said to you earlier on, it's very easy to get totally depressed about the whole thing and feel that it's hopeless, particularly with the shower we've got in government at the moment.
Yeah.
So you've got to find a way round that and square that with the desire not to leave the world in such a bloody awful place that the little tots that live opposite have a bloody awful life.
Again, I come back to getting the vision right. There was President Kennedy visited the Manned Spacecraft Center at Houston a little while after he had announced this whole thing, and he found a man sweeping the grounds there, and he asked him what he was doing, and the guy says, "Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon."
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So
Yeah.
once you've got the vision in people's heads, everybody sees that everything they're doing is working towards that. And the day-to-day discomforts, you know, if you thought that you were going to live in a crap house forever, that might not be so good. But if the people of Bristol know that there's a group building 150 million quid's worth of nice, more affordable, environmentally sustainable housing, and that in 5 years' time there'll be more of that, then it's sort of like, okay, that's something I can live with and work towards.
Exactly. So it gives people hope.
Yeah.
Also, I think going back to the politics of it, it means you can push up. Because I think our politics is still quite top down. I mean, one of the reasons I like Luke is because he's very approachable. Luke Pollard, our MP. But, you know, it seems to me that politics is very much up there in Westminster. And I know that Labour are talking about delegating it down, which is good, assuming that it actually happens in that way.
Well, I'm saying don't delegate it down. Bring the MPs in and say, you know, these are our demands. Which is, we want you to help support us develop a better community locally, not just fiddle around with stuff that you've been elected to do nationally, which we don't think you and your cohort are doing a very good job of. Come and help us make a good job of what we need in our communities. Make sure that we get legislation in place that sorts out the regulatory barriers over the next 10 years so that we get green economy, and then we'll have something we can show the world. Then we'll have something that our children will be proud of.
And
the point is, the starting point is, let's assume that we are carbon neutral by 2030, and we have dramatically changed everything, as we will have to make that happen. Let's make those changes be to the best advantage of our communities.
Yes.
I mean, you know, President Zelensky, he's fighting a battle against a horrible aggressor. But his vision is, at the end of it, we're going to rebuild Ukraine like it never was before, right? Because we deserve it. And we were starting to build a beautiful country, and we were invaded by an aggressor who seems bent on destroying his own economy and ours at the same time. Well, we're going to come out of this the right way up.
Yes. No, I mean, you're totally right, David. I mean, it's exactly the sort of thing you used to teach in management. You know, the top actually decides what the aims and objectives of the organization are, and then it cascades it down so that people at each level talk about how that they would bring that vision about. Well, what needs to happen.
And if you do it right in a co-op, then the top are on the same level as everybody else.
Exactly, which is why a co-op is so much.
It doesn't need to be a hierarchy anymore.
No, it doesn't.
And you bring your own.
And in fact, that helps with when you bring the MP in, because you're saying, well, you can be part of this, but you're part of the group. You're not.
We're bringing you in as an equal with a specific role in Westminster. And guess what? If you don't do a very good job, we have a very capable group here, and we'll send somebody else in 4 years' time.
I love that, David. I was always very interested in power when I did sociology, and I love that. I better let you go, and I better go to tea. Thank you very much.
Lovely,
David.
Jenny.
Absolutely fascinating. And if I hadn't got to get tea, you would never get away.
We'll talk again.
Thank you very much for your time.
Take care. God bless.
Bye.
Bye.